Hello and welcome to our class reader, Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now, this is a very popular adventure book, sold millions and millions of copies. So reading Jules Verne, I suppose, is sort of like an episode of EastEnders for an audience of the time. Now, it's written in a very factual style, so that we really believe that this is a scientific journal that has been written about this monster of the deep, and it's full of exciting vocabulary and interesting language techniques that you can use in your creative writing. Now, how it's going to work is that every day I'm going to read one or two chapters. I've annotated interesting vocabulary, and then we're going to talk about how you can use this vocabulary and techniques in your own creative writing. But first of all, we need to have a look at the story. Now, it's the story of, Monsieur Pierre Aronnax, Professor of Natural History, who is embarking on a fateful voyage to rid the seas of a huge monster. Bit of a spoiler here, the creature turns out, after all, not to be a living monster of the deep, but a fantastic submarine under the command of Captain Nemo. Yes, Nemo from Finding Nemo. Now, Nemo means no man, therefore Nemo is every man. And Jules Verne uses the character of Captain Nemo to talk about a lot of issues to do with society and political issues that were going on at the time. Don't worry about that, we will look at those as we go through. Most importantly, I really want you to enjoy what is a fascinating and entertaining story. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1, A Shifting Reef. Now, you can either get hold of your own copy of the book, or if you have a look at the link that I'm going to put underneath the video, you can download it and look at it online from Project Gutenberg. It's out of copyright at the moment, so you're not going to have any police banging on your door after 50p for Jules Verne. And you can either read it along with me looking at your screen, or you can print off your own copy, or I suggest you just make a note of the words that I annotate and we can look at these together. Okay, Part 1, Chapter 1, A Shifting Reef. The year 1866 was signalised by a remarkable incident, a mysterious and inexplicable phenomenon which doubtless no one has yet forgotten. Not to mention rumours which agitated the maritime population and excited the public mind. Agitated means to upset, so the maritime population is sailors, people to do with the sea, and excited is pretty obvious, but I like the way that it agitated one and excited the people. Not to mention rumours which agitated the maritime population and excited the public mind. Even in the interior of continents, seafaring men were particularly excited. Merchants, common sailors, captains of vessels, skippers both of Europe and America, naval officers of all countries, and the governments of several states on the two continents were deeply interested in the matter. For some time past, vessels had been met by an enormous thing, a long object, spindle-shaped, occasionally phosphorescent, that means like glow in the dark, and infinitely larger and more rapid in its movements than a whale. The facts relating to this apparition, entered in various logbooks, agreed in most respects as to the shape of the object or creature in question, the untiring rapidity of its movements, its surprising power of locomotion, and the peculiar life with which it seemed endowed. So locomotion, rapidity, meaning it moved at speed. If it was a cetacean, which is a marine term meaning like a whale or a porpoise, it surpassed in size all those hitherto classified in science. Taking into consideration the mean of observations made at divers times, rejecting the timid estimate of those who assigned to this object a length of 200 feet, equally with the exaggerated opinions which set it down as a mile in width and 3 in length, we might fairly conclude that this mysterious being surpassed greatly all dimensions admitted by the ichthyologists of the day, if it existed at all. That means marine biologists. And that it did exist was an undeniable fact. And with that tendency which disposes the human mind in favour of the marvellous, we can understand the excitement produced in the entire world by this supernatural apparition. As to classing it in the list of fables, the idea was out of the question. So everybody believed that it was real. On the 20th of July, 1866, the steamer Governor Higginson of the Calcutta and Burnach Steam Navigation Company had met this moving mass 5 miles off the east coast of Australia. Captain Baker thought at first that he was in the presence of an unknown sandbank. He even prepared to determine its exact position when 2 columns of water, projected by the inexplicable object, shot with a hissing noise 150 feet up into the air. Now, unless the sandbank had been submitted to the intermittent eruption of a geyser, the governor, Higginson, had to do neither more nor less than with an aquatic mammal, unknown till then, which threw up from its blowholes columns of water mixed with air and vapour. Similar facts were observed on the 23rd of July in the same year in the Pacific Ocean by the Columbus of the West India and Pacific Steam Navigation Company. But this extraordinary cetaceous creature could transport itself from one place to another with surprising velocity, as in an interval of 3 days the Governor Higginson and the Columbus had observed it at 2 different points of the chart, separated by a distance of more than 700 nautical leagues. So a league is a unit of measurement. 15 days later, 2,000 miles farther off, the Helvetia of the Compagnie Nationale and the Shannon of the Royal Mail Steamship Company, sailing to windward in that portion of the Atlantic lying between the United States and Europe, respectively signalled the monster to each other in 42 degrees 15 north latitude and 60 degrees 35 west long. Those are map references. In these simultaneous observations, they thought themselves justified in estimating the minimum length of the mammal at more than 350 feet, as the Shannon and Helvetia were of smaller dimensions than it, although they measured 300 feet overall. Now, the largest whales, those which frequent those parts of the sea around the Aleutian, Kulimak and Umgullik Islands, have never exceeded the length of 60 yards, if they attain that. So if this is a whale, it's a big whale. These reports arriving one after the other with fresh observations made on board the transatlantic ship Pereira, a collision which occurred between the Etna of the Inman line and the monster, a procès verbal directed by the officers of the French frigate Normandy, a very accurate survey made by the staff of Commodore Fitz James on board the Lord Clyde, greatly influenced public opinion. Like-thinking people jested upon the phenomenon, but grave practical countries such as England, America, and Germany treated the matter more seriously. In every place of great resort, the monster was the fashion. They sang of it in the cafes, ridiculed it in the papers, and represented it on the stage. All kinds of stories were circulated regarding it. There appeared in the papers caricatures of every gigantic and imaginate creature, from the white whale, the terrible Moby Dick of Hyperborean regions, to the immense kraken, whose tentacles could entangle a ship of 500 tons and hurry it into the abyss of the ocean. A caricature is a drawing that's sort of mocking something. The legends of ancient times were even resuscitated, and the opinions of Aristotle and Pliny revived, who admitted the existence of these monsters, as well as the Norwegian tales of Bishop Pontopian, the accounts of Paul Heggarty, and last of all the reports of Mr. Harrington, whose good faith no one could suspect, who affirmed that, being on board the Castilian in 1857, he had seen this enormous serpent, which had never until that time frequented any other seas but those of the ancient constitutional. Right, now, Aristotle and Pliny were both Greek writers who wrote about monsters, sort of thing that Miss Harvey likes to read about. Then burst forth the interminable controversy between the credulous and the incredulous in the societies of savants and scientific journals. Right, so this basically means that lots of people were arguing. That means ongoing and a bit tedious. People were either believing it or not. The question of the monster inflamed all minds. Editors of scientific journals, quarrelling with believers in the supernatural, spilled seas of ink during this memorable campaign, some even drawing blood, for from the sea serpent they came to direct personalities. For 6 months, war was waged with various fortune in the leading articles of the Geographical Institution of Brazil, the Royal Academy of Science of Berlin, the British Association, the Smithsonian Institute of Washington, in the discussions of the Indian archipelago, of the cosmos of the Abbé Mogigno, in the Mytholuvian of Peterman, in the scientific chronicles of the great journals of France and other countries. The cheaper journals replied keenly and with inexhaustible zest. These satirical writers parodied a remark of Linnaeus, quoted by the adversaries of the monster, maintaining that nature did not make fools, and adjured their contemporaries not to give the lie to nature by admitting the existence of krakens, sea serpents, Moby Dicks, and other lubrications of delirious sailors. That means study. So that'd be a good word when your mum's shouting up the stairs. Are you on your Xbox? You can say, no, I'm doing lucubrations. At length, an article in a well-known satirical journal by a favourite contributor, the chief of the staff, settled the monster like Hippolytus, giving it the death blow amidst a universal burst of laughter. Wit had conquered science. So basically, lots of people in newspapers refused to believe that it was true and made jokes about it and drew funny pictures about it, so people didn't believe that it was real. During the first months of the year 1867, the question seemed buried never to revive when new facts were brought before the public. It was then no longer a scientific problem to be solved, but a real danger seriously to be avoided. The question took quite another shape. The monster became a small island, a rock, a reef, but a reef of indefinite and shifting proportions. On the 5th of March 1867, the Moravian of the Montreal Ocean Company, finding herself during the night in 27 degrees latitude and 72 degrees longitude, struck on her starboard quarter a rock marked in no chart for that part of the sea. Under the combined efforts of the wind and its 400 horsepower, it was going at a rate of 13 knots. Had it not been for the superior strength of the hull of the Moravian, she would have been broken by the shock and gone down with the 237 passengers she was bringing home from Canada. The accident happened about 5 o'clock in the morning as the day was breaking. The officers of the quarterdeck hurried to the after part of the vessel. They examined the sea with the most scrupulous attention. They saw nothing but a strong eddy at a movement of the water, about 3 cables' length distant, as if the surface had been violently agitated. The bearings of the place were taken exactly, and the Moravian continued its route without apparent damage. Had it struck on a submerged rock or on an enormous wreck? They could not tell. But on examination of the ship's bottom, when undergoing repairs, it was found that part of her keel was broken. This fact, so grave in itself, might perhaps have been forgotten like many others, if 3 weeks after it had not been reenacted under similar circumstances. But thanks to the nationality of the victim of the shock, thanks to the reputation of the company to which the vessel belonged, the circumstance became extensively circulated. The 13th of April 1867, the sea being beautiful, the breeze favourable, the Scotia of the Cunard Company's line, they're the people who made the Titanic, found herself in 15 degrees longitude and 45 degrees latitude. She was going at the speed of 13 knots and a half. At 17 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, while the passengers were assembled at lunch in the great saloon, a slight shock was felt on the hull of the Scotia, on her quarter, a little aft of the port paddle. The Scotia had not struck, but she had been struck, and seemingly by something rather sharp and penetrating than blunt. The shock had been so slight that no one had been alarmed, had it not been for the shouts of the carpenter's watch, who rushed onto the bridge exclaiming, "We are sinking! We are sinking!" At first the passengers were much frightened, but Captain Anderson hastened to reassure them. The danger could not be imminent. The Scotia, divided into 7 compartments by strong partitions, could brave with impunity any leak. Sounds like the Titanic. Captain Anderson went down immediately into the hold. He found that the sea was pouring into the 5th compartment, and the rapidity of the influx proved that the force of the water was considerable. Fortunately, this compartment did not hold the boilers or the fires, which would have been immediately extinguished. Captain Anderson ordered the engines to be stopped at once, and one of the men went down to ascertain the extent of the injury. Some minutes afterwards, they discovered the existence of a large hole of 2 meters in diameter in the ship's bottom. No laughing. Such a leak could not be stopped, and the Scotia, her paddles half submerged, was obliged to continue her course. She was then 300 miles from Cape Clear, and after 3 days' delay, which caused great uneasiness in Liverpool, she entered the basin of the company. The engineers visited the Scotia, which was put in dry dock. They could scarcely believe it possible. At 2.5 yards below watermark was a regular rent, that means a tear, in the form of an isosceles triangle. The broken place in the iron plates was so perfectly defined that it could not have been more neatly done by a punch. It was clear then that the instrument producing the perforation was not of a common stamp, and after having been driven with prodigious strength, that's very strong, and piercing an iron plate 1 3/8 inches thick, had withdrawn itself by a retrograde motion truly inexplicable. Retrograde means going backwards. Such was the last fact, which resulted in exciting once more the torrent of public opinion. From this moment, all unlucky casualties which could not be otherwise accounted for were put down to the monster. Upon this imaginary creature rested the responsibility of all these shipwrecks, which unfortunately were considerable. For of 3,000 ships whose loss was annually recorded at Lloyd's, the number of sailing and steamships supposed to be totally lost from the absence of all news amounted to not less than 200. Now, it was the monster who justly or unjustly was accused of their disappearance, and thanks to it, communication between the different continents became more and more dangerous. The public demanded peremptorily, which means they want it doing now and quickly, that the seas should be at any price be relieved from this formidable cetacean. That means a whale or a porpoise. Now, please forgive any words that I've not pronounced correctly, but it just goes to show that even amazingly clever, witty, and gorgeous teachers like me can struggle to pronounce certain words sometimes. Now, the creature is not a whale. We know that much. But the fact that it has been described for its pace, its shape, and the fact that it sends jets of water up into the air reminds us of a whale. And I like this bit here where he's talking about the insurance, because obviously lots of people whose ships went down, whether they really went down due to the monster, I think Vern here is suggesting that it was possibly insurance fraud. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pause this now. I'm going to write a list of the words. And if you've got a dictionary at home, or you can look them up online, I want you to look at the meaning of those words. And I'd like you to write a description of a monster of your own using the new vocabulary that you have learnt today. I shall put a list of those words in the comments, and then we'll talk about it next time.